My stepmother thought she could evict me from my father's house, but she didn't know I had proof, a lawyer, and 24 hours to turn the tables on her. Throwaway account because I really don't want this traced back to me by certain people who still lurk on social media. If you've ever wondered how far a person will go to protect what's theirs, and how karma has a funny way of showing up at the worst possible moment, buckle up. Before I proceed, don't forget to like, share a story and subscribe. This story has everything. A scheming stepmother, a house full of secrets, and the satisfaction of watching someone learn they aren't as powerful as they thought. I'm going to lay it all out because I'm tired of carrying it around. If nothing else, maybe it will help someone else dealing with entitled family. I am a 28-year-old female who grew up in a smallish town where everyone knew everyone's business, or thought they did. My dad was a well-known contractor, the kind of man who could build you a whole house with his own hands and then host a barbecue out back to celebrate. My mom died when I was 10. Car accident, and it gutted both of us. For a while it was just Dad and me, figuring out how to survive in a house that suddenly felt too big and too quiet. 2 years later, my dad started dating Carla. She was different from my mom in every possible way. Flashy, loud, always dressed like she was about to walk onto a reality show set. But he seemed happy again. And when you're a kid who's watched your parent dissolve into grief, you start to think maybe any happiness is better than none. They married when I was 13. That's when everything changed. Carla moved in, and so did her daughter Mandy, who was 12 at the time. To hear Carla tell it, they were a package deal, like some buy one get one free promotion. First I tried to get along with Mandy. We were close in age, and I thought maybe we'd become something like sisters. But she took her cues from her mom, and Carla made it very clear. I was an obstacle. The first year was a minefield. Carla reorganized the house, redecorated every room, and quietly packed away most of my mother's things. Every time I tried to set something back in its place, a framed photo, a quilt, a vase, it would disappear again within a day. My dad tried to mediate, but Carla would cry and insist she was just trying to make it feel like home. Eventually he stopped arguing. I learned to pick my battles. I kept my mother's keepsakes in boxes in my closet, and I stayed out of Carla's way. When I was 16, my grandfather passed away. He left me a trust that I wouldn't be able to touch until I turned 25. It wasn't millions, just over $100,000, but in our town, that was more than enough to make people pay attention. Carla tried to talk Dad into using it for family expenses. I overheard the argument late one night. "She doesn't need all that money," she hissed. "We could put it toward the mortgage or fix the roof." "It's hers," my dad said firmly. "My dad left it to her. Not us." "That's ridiculous. She's a child. She won't be forever." He didn't budge. It was one of the only times I ever heard him stand his ground with her. After that, she started treating me differently. More resentful, more calculating. I didn't realize how deep that bitterness went until years later. My dad's health started to fail when I was about 22. First it was high blood pressure, then diabetes, then small strokes that left him confused and exhausted. I was still in college, driving home every weekend to help. Carla always had somewhere else to be. Nail appointments, trips to see old friends, shopping excursions. She'd breeze in late at night, reeking of cheap perfume and vodka, and complain about how tired she was. I took over a lot of the caretaking. Mandy was no help. By then she'd moved out to live with her boyfriend. Carla spent more time away than home. When Dad passed away, I was 24. It was me at the hospital holding his hand. Me signing the paperwork. Me calling relatives to tell them he was gone. Carla showed up half an hour after he died. She was wearing a new fur-trimmed coat. Dad's will was clear. He left the house to me outright. Carla had a life estate. She could live there until she remarried or moved out, but she couldn't sell it. Mandy got a small cash inheritance. Everything else was split equally between Carla and me. I wasn't surprised. My dad was always trying to be fair, but he also wanted me to have something permanent. Carla was furious. She tried to contest it but failed. For a while she simmered quietly, taking every opportunity to remind me that she was the lady of the house. I was working full-time and saving money, so I didn't mind letting her stay. The arrangement was awkward, but it was temporary. She'd eventually remarry or move on. I underestimated her spite. 3 years later I finally turned 27. I had my trust funds, my savings, and plans to renovate the house. I offered Carla a very generous buyout so she could find her own place. She refused. "This is my home," she sneered. "You can't just kick me out." I reminded her I wasn't. She had a life estate as long as she wanted it. But if she stayed, she needed to start contributing to the property taxes and utilities, which I'd been covering entirely out of respect for my father's memory. She didn't like that. One morning, she left an envelope taped to my bedroom door. Inside was a typed letter that said, "You have 30 days to vacate this property or I will have you removed." I read it 3 times, half convinced it was a joke. Then I saw the notarized signature at the bottom. She was serious. How she thought she could do it. Apparently, Carla had consulted a lawyer who told her she could evict me as a non-rent-paying adult child, conveniently ignoring the part where I owned the house and she merely had a life estate. Either the lawyer was incompetent, or she lied about the circumstances. She left pamphlets about local rentals on the kitchen counter. She started referring to my bedroom as the guest room. She even hosted a dinner party where she told her friends, loudly enough that I could hear, that I would be out soon. That's when I decided. Enough was enough. She thought she had 30 days to bully me into leaving. I decided she had 24 hours. I called my own attorney, Mr. Lyle, who was very familiar with the will and the property. When I sent him a copy of Carla's letter, he laughed. "She can't evict you," he said. "She's the tenant here, not you." "Can I remove her?" "Yes." "Legally. If she's violated the terms of her life estate, yes. If she's abandoned the property or failed to maintain it, you have grounds." I told him about the months she'd been living primarily with her boyfriend in the next town, only dropping by a couple days a week. About the unpaid utilities, the neglected repairs, the damage she'd allowed in the back garden. He started taking notes. "Send me everything," he said. "Photos, bills, dates. We'll file an immediate motion." Within 48 hours, he had drafted paperwork to revoke her life estate on grounds of abandonment and property neglect. But that wasn't all. I also called the local code enforcement office. Carla had ignored multiple notices to clear junk from the side yard. They were happy to follow up. And I called the utilities company. Since the bills were in my name, I gave 24-hour notice that service would be shut off pending a change of residence. The next morning, I knocked on Carla's bedroom door. She cracked it open, wearing a robe and that perpetual smirk. 30 days, she said sweetly, and I expect you out. I handed her an envelope. You have 24 hours. Her smile faded. What is this? Notice of termination of your life estate due to abandonment and failure to maintain the property. Copies were filed with the county clerk this morning. Her hands trembled as she ripped it open. She scanned the first page, then the second. You can't do this, she hissed. I can. And I did. You're bluffing. I handed her the second envelope. Copies of the complaints filed with code enforcement, photos of the neglected property, and records showing she hadn't paid a single utility bill or tax assessment in over a year. She flipped through them, her face going pale. You spiteful little bitch, she whispered. I didn't respond. I turned and walked down the hall, leaving her standing there with her mouth opening and closing like a dying fish. The sheriff's deputy arrived precisely at 10 a.m. to oversee her departure. He was polite but firm, reminding her that any attempts to remove property later would have to be scheduled in advance. She screamed. She cried. She threatened to sue everyone in sight. By noon she was gone. She left behind a mountain of junk, old clothes, broken furniture, boxes of who knows. Took me weeks to sort and dispose of everything. But when it was over, the house finally felt clean. Mandy tried to call me a few times to talk things out. Blocked her. Carla tried to smear me all over Facebook, but most people knew the truth or didn't care. The town had watched her antics for years. I sold some of Carla's abandoned valuables to pay for the repairs. I repainted every room. I planted new flowers in the garden she'd left to die. And every morning I woke up in my own home, free of her poison. I thought that would be the end of it. That after she was gone, Carla would slither back to wherever she'd been spending her nights and find some new mark to leech off of. For a while, it almost looked like that would be the case. The first week was blissfully quiet. No drama. No screaming matches. No envelopes taped to my door. I walked around the house and realized just how much of it I'd been avoiding. There were whole closets I hadn't opened in years because I didn't want to deal with what she'd stuffed inside. My mom's old linens shoved behind boxes of holiday junk, my childhood trophies and report cards crushed under piles of cheap handbags and shoes. It was like she'd tried to erase any evidence that the house had belonged to someone before her. Like if she buried it deeply enough, she could pretend she'd always been the one in charge. For the first time since Dad died, I felt like I could breathe. I started making lists of repairs, fixing the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom, recaulking the kitchen windows, refinishing the porch railing. It wasn't just about upkeep. It felt symbolic, a way to take back every inch she'd tried to claim. I kept thinking about something my dad said the last time he was really lucid. It was late, after I'd gotten him settled in bed. He reached for my hand, looked me in the eye and said, "You were always stronger than she gave you credit for." At the time I thought he was just being sentimental, but now I finally understood he meant Carla. He'd seen what she was, even if he didn't always have the energy to fight it. Took about 3 weeks for Carla to start circling back. I was in the middle of scrubbing years of cigarette film off the kitchen cabinets when the doorbell rang. I peeked out the side window and my stomach sank. Carla was standing on the porch in giant sunglasses and a bright pink cardigan, holding a small suitcase. Her mouth was set in this thin, brittle line, like she'd practiced her expression in the mirror. I didn't open the door. I wasn't stupid. Instead, I cracked the window just enough to hear her voice. "You need to let me in," she called. "I forgot some personal items." "You were given your chance to collect them," I said flatly. "I wasn't given adequate time," she snapped, her volume rising. "You blindsided me. You acted like some vulture. You're not even really family." I shut the window in her face. She pounded on the door for a while. I sat on the couch, breathing slowly, refusing to let her see me lose control. After about 15 minutes, she finally gave up and stomped back to the curb. A few minutes later, I heard the sputter of her boyfriend's beat-up pickup pulling away. That was the moment it really sank in that she didn't have any leverage left. For years she'd held this unspoken power over me. Using guilt, using the fact that I didn't want to make things worse for my dad, using the idea that I should be grateful she took care of us. Now she had nothing. And I'd never seen her look smaller. Later that day, I got a text from Mandy. "I don't know why you're being so cruel. She just wanted a few things. She's homeless, you know." I almost laughed. Homeless. Carla had a boyfriend with a house, plus her own money. She just didn't want to live anywhere she couldn't play Queen Bee. I didn't answer. Mandy texted again and again, paragraphs of dramatic accusations about how I'd waited for Dad to die, so I could take everything. I screenshotted the messages, sent them to my lawyer for the file, and blocked her. I wasn't going to spend another second explaining myself to people who'd never cared about the truth. After that, I threw myself into clearing out the rooms Carla had claimed as her territory. It was like peeling back layers of someone else's bad dreams. I started in what had been my dad's study. When I was little, that was his haven. Dark wood bookshelves, a massive desk, a worn leather armchair where he'd sit with his feet up after work. He used to let me crawl into his lap with my library books while he balanced his ledgers. Even after he married Carla, he tried to keep it as his own space. But after he got sick, she turned it into a storage closet. I hadn't been able to look at it for years. I spent 2 days sorting through the piles. I found old tax returns, bags of Christmas decorations, boxes of cheap shopping channel jewelry. But I also found pieces of my dad. Handwritten notes, old Polaroids of him and my mom in their 20s, the tiny ceramic owl I'd made him in 2nd grade that he used as a paperweight. It was like the house itself was sighing with relief to have the garbage finally hauled away. Every time I carried a trash bag out to the curb, it felt like another layer of her was peeling off the walls. A couple of weeks after she left, I got a letter addressed to the estate of Thomas Callahan. Inside was a final bill for unpaid credit cards. $12,000, racked up after Dad died. All in Carla's name. But because the card had originally been a joint account, it had defaulted to the estate when he passed. Called my attorney again. He sighed. It's not uncommon, he said. You're not personally liable if the estate doesn't have the assets. But she may try to say you're withholding them. Of course she will, I muttered. Sure enough, a week later I got an email. Some rant about how I was sitting on Dad's fortune while she struggled to survive. She had the nerve to claim she'd always been the one to care for him, when anyone who knew us knew she'd been out drinking half the time. I forwarded everything to my lawyer. Then I poured myself a glass of wine and made a list of all the things I was going to do with the house now that it was finally, truly mine. Some people asked me why I didn't just sell it and move on. Thought about it. But the truth was, this was still the place I'd grown up. The place my mom's handprint was still set in the cement at the back step. The place my dad had built with his own hands. Carla had tried to defile it, but she hadn't succeeded in erasing it. Selling it would have felt like letting her win. So I stayed. Painted every wall. I replaced the kitchen tile she'd insisted was modern. I ripped out the ugly landscaping she'd planted and put in lilacs and roses, like my mom used to grow. Little by little, the house started to look familiar again, like it remembered who it belonged to. Of course, in a town like ours, everybody eventually heard what had happened. I'd run into old neighbors at the grocery store or the bank, and they'd give me a knowing nod. I heard you finally got rid of her, one woman said, half whispering like it was a scandal. Good for you. Couple of people tried to tell me I was too harsh. That family is family. But most people knew exactly what Carla was. And when I told them the truth, that she tried to evict me from my own inheritance, they stopped trying to defend her. About 3 months after she left, I got a certified letter from Carla's latest lawyer. It was a demand for mediation, claiming I had wrongfully seized property and caused undue emotional distress. My lawyer and I spent half an hour laughing about it. You've already provided all the documentation, he reminded me. She can waste her money on letters if she wants, but she doesn't have a legal leg to stand on. I decided not to respond. Let her pay another retainer to a lawyer who'd eventually tell her the same thing. And that was the last I ever heard from her directly. Sometimes late at night I still think about how quickly everything changed. About how long I'd spent trying not to rock the boat, trying to keep the peace for my dad's sake. It's strange how much energy you can waste trying to placate people who will never be satisfied. But mostly I feel relief. Gratitude. The house is finally quiet, but not in the hollow way it was after Dad died. It's a peaceful quiet. Clean slate. I wish he could see it now. I think he'd be proud I finally stood up for myself. That I didn't let Carla rewrite history. After the house was fixed up, I started hosting Sunday dinners again like my mom used to. My cousins and their kids would come over, and the house would fill with laughter and the smell of roasting chicken. Sometimes I'd catch myself smiling just watching everyone pile in through the front door. One evening, I dug out an old photo album and passed it around the table. Pictures of my parents when they were young, my mom holding me as a baby, my dad building the porch out back. My aunt squeezed my hand and whispered, "You brought this place back to life." Felt like closing a circle. Like all the ugliness Carla tried to plant here had finally been uprooted. I heard through the grapevine that she bounced around a few places after she left. A friend of a friend said she'd moved in with her boyfriend, but that didn't last. She tried renting a condo in a fancier neighborhood, but eventually she left town. Nobody seemed to know or care where she went. I used to wonder if she'd ever try to crawl back, but I realized she never would. She thrived on an audience, on having people to manipulate. Without Dad, and without me, there was no one left to perform for. It took me years to realize this, but the people who try to control you with threats and guilt usually count on you never calling their bluff. Carla thought I'd be too intimidated to fight her. That I'd roll over rather than stand up for myself. She was wrong. Sometimes the best revenge isn't a screaming match or a courtroom battle. Sometimes it's a single well-timed move that cuts off their power for good. She thought she had 30 days to break me. But she didn't understand. I'd already spent years surviving her. I only needed 24 hours to be free.